Hello, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 3 of my Alchemy synth tutorial series in Logic Pro 10. In this video, we'll look at some of Alchemy's modulation sources, including the LFOs, envelopes, and sequencer, and also using the built-in effects unit. In the previous 2 videos, we already looked at using the browser, the simple view, the XY pad called the Remix pad in the Camel audio version. We also looked at using the sources and oscillator views, and we also went over the filters and master controls. This time, instead of working off a preset like I've been doing before, I'm just going to go up to File, Clear, and it's going to default Alchemy to a setting where basically you just have a really sort of stock, rough sawtooth pad or sawtooth synth. So nothing special. In this video, I'm working with a pre-composed idea that I made here. It's just a chord idea and just the drum loop. Right now, I just have the chord idea being played by a piano. Let's hear what this sounds like. What I want to do with this chord idea is I want to create something that's has some motion to it, like almost like a motion sequence. And this is going to be really, really easy to do using Alchemy's LFOs and the sequencer. As we discussed in the previous video, this area up here is the oscillator, filter, and master control area, basically where the sound comes from. The area down here is where all of your modulation happens, basically synthesis modulation units that affect the sound that was generated up here. Anytime you click on a knob in the top area, you'll see that parameter displayed down here in the modulation section as a modulation target. For each modulation target you choose, you can modulate it with any number of sources that you can choose from this window here. So after I clear this out and go back to the default setting, one of the preset sort of modulations that are set up is on the master volume control over here. Pretty much any knob that you see this little orange wrap around it basically means that there's some sort of modulation being applied to that target. So if I click on the master volume knob, you'll see that the envelope is modulating volume, and that's to basically track the volume across time of the entire synthesizer. If you turn that off, the sound's just going to go on forever. And you have to basically turn that on or mute the synth in order to get it to stop, because there's no release being sent to the synthesizer to tell it to stop the sound from happening. When you modulate the master volume with an envelope, when you release the key, the sound actually ends, it releases. So this is like the most basic type of modulation. By the way, all of your modulation assignments take place over here, but you can physically view your modulation sources over here. So the other thing to keep in mind is the number of the modulation source that you're looking at. You can view LFOs, envelopes, and the sequencer just by clicking here, but that doesn't just mean you only get one envelope or one LFO. It actually means you can sort of cycle between them. This one says currently number 1. So if I chose AHDSR and say add new AHDSR number 2, now I can view number 2, or I can view number 1, and I can change the settings of number 1 and change the settings of number 2 individually. So in case you're not very familiar with how synthesis modulation works, let me give you a few examples. Modulation targets are things in a synthesizer that are being modulated or affected. So for example here, the output volume of the synth is being affected by the envelope. The envelope is the modulation source. It's what's doing the affecting. It's what's affecting the target. So something like an LFO, an envelope, or the sequencer can all be modulation sources. Some basic examples of other types of synthesis modulation would be modulating the volume of the entire synthesizer, say with an LFO instead of an envelope. So if I chose LFO, I'm going to get sort of like a pulsing effect. Another really common example is to modulate the cutoff frequency of a filter with an LFO to create sort of like a filter sweeping effect. You can also modulate the filter cutoff with an envelope as well. And you can get filter sweeps this way as well. And I'll go over these controls in just a moment here. Just like that, you can create filter sweeps. Another really common modulation technique is to modulate the fine-tuning of an oscillator with an LFO to create sort of like a vibrato effect. So there's all sorts of little things you can do, and some of them are more basic, like filter sweeps and vibrato and pulsing effects. Some are more advanced. Some allow you to create like rhythmic effects, especially with the sequencer source, which a lot of synthesizers don't have. Most synths will have an envelope and an LFO. All right, so let's start real simple here and just modulate the master volume. Already assigned to the master volume is the AHDSR. This, again, controls the overall volume of the synth as you press and hold the key. Most envelopes will have 4 stages: attack, decay, sustain, and release. This one also has a hold stage, which can hold the volume for a bit before the envelope decays down to a sustained point. So there's 2 ways you can control this. You can either just grab the stages in the AHDSR menu, and you can make the attack time be longer or shorter. You can make the hold time be longer or shorter. You can pull up or down the sustain amount, and you can make the release longer or shorter. You can also just use the controls down here instead of grabbing the interface there. So I'm going to pull the hold all the way to 0, no hold right now. Pull the decay up, pull the sustain up a bit, and pull the release up. And so what should happen is the sound should fade in, should duck down to a sustained level, and then when I release the key, it'll take a little while for it to fade out. Okay, so that was really fast. Let's make that a lot slower. And notice that when the sound gets far enough in the envelope, it stays right there on the sustain until you release the key. So for this, I told you guys I wanted to create something that's more of like a moving motion pad. I don't want it to be a lead, so I'm going to use a longer attack just so the sound sort of fades in a little bit. Let's try pulling the hold out. So what'll happen is it'll fade in, it'll stay up here for a while, then it'll duck down. And there we go. I like the way that sounds. I'm just going to pull the sustain up just a bit more. Another cool thing you can do with the envelope in Alchemy is you can actually sync it to musical time. You can essentially quantize the points of the envelope to musical time, and this is completely dependent upon your tempo. So if I'm at like 120, I think I'm at 128 right now. And if I make this, twice as fast, or almost twice as fast, like 200, the envelope actually, moves faster because it's quantizing its stage points to different beats on the grid. So that's what the sync option does. I'm not going to do that for this, but it could be useful later when we create some other modulation effects. All right, so that's just the master volume envelope. That's all that is. It's just controlling the volume of the entire synthesizer. Another modulation source that's automatically set up for volume is velocity. If you have this off, it doesn't matter how hard or how soft you hit the keys, you're going to get the same volume. I'm going to barely touch the keys. Same volume. When you turn velocity on, it makes volume react to velocity changes. So if I pull up the depth, it'll react more. If you pull down the depth, it'll react less. So now I can play softly, or I can play it harder. So that's that. All right, what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to add a couple more oscillators in here. I'm going to pan one little to the left, one little to the right. One of these I'm going to detune by an octave. It's going to be like a lower sawtooth. I'm also going to turn the number of voices up and detune them a bit. I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to pull a filter in here, just a touch, not a whole lot. I'm going to pull a filter in here as well. And let's see what that sounds like. So it's amazing what you can do with just a volume envelope and a couple detuned saw teeth. You can do some really cool things. We are clipping though, so let me pull these down quite a bit. I've got sort of like this sort of synth string pad. All right, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in a modulation source on each of the two saw teeth, but not on the sawtooth itself, but actually on the filter. That's the source filter. So I'm going to go into my sawtooth A here, source A, click on the cutoff knob. I'm going to click on to turn the target on. I'm going to go to LFO, and I'm going to choose LFO 1. LFO 1 defaults to a sine wave that synchronizes to a quarter note. So we should hear is sort of like a quarter note sweeping effect. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off sawtooth B here. Now you can choose different shapes for these. Square wave, triangle. So there's some really cool shapes in there that you normally don't get in most synths. I'm gonna use one of the more subtle ones from the beginning here. I'm gonna pull the depth down as well. Let's go over to sawtooth B here. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm going to do a different one though, so I'm going to say new LFO. So now I can switch between LFO 1, which is controlling the source filter for sawtooth A, and then this one that's doing sawtooth B. This one I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do maybe like a slower rate. I'm going to go up to, or down to a half note instead. And we'll talk about the syncing options and things a little bit later. Let's do something different. So this one's B, and this one's A, and then together. I'm going to pull the depth down. I just want this to be a subtle effect. I don't want it to be really super noticeable. All right, next, what we're going to do is we're going to add a pulsing effect, and we're going to layer it with our two saw teeth up here. For now, I'm going to mute these. I'm just going to turn off these sources and just hear my new one. This one I'm going to tune maybe up an octave, and I'm going to use something maybe a little more, I don't know, a little more drivey sounding. With this one. Maybe I won't go up an octave. We'll go back down. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the number of voices and detune it a bit. I'm going to affect the volume of this one. So I'm going to click on its volume knob. So you can actually affect the volume of these individually, not just the master volume. So I'm going to click on just the volume of this one. Turn that on. I'm going to create another LFO. So you just say new LFO. So now we're on LFO 3. And what I'm going to do is there's one in here called, it's like a rhythm pattern. Oh, it's pattern 1 is the one I liked. There you go. Now with these LFOs, there's a lot of controls in here. The first, obviously, isn't actually even in here. It's the depth over here. The depth knob controls how much of the modulation is happening. So if you want a softer effect, you can pull this down. If you want a harder effect, you can pull it up. I want somewhere in between. Another thing you can do is you can adjust the rate of the effect. Now, if you turn off the sync option, it's just going to give you hertz values. So it's going to basically run through the wave a certain number of times per second based on what your hertz is. Based on what the frequency is. So that's like not a clock synced effect. If you click sync, it'll actually synchronize to the tempo of your session. So if I say I want this to be a quarter note effect, and then I change my tempo to go faster like I did before, the internal clock of Alchemy updates and now plays it at 200 rather than at the original 128. So I like that. Let's try quarter note. That's too fast. Now the delay knob delays the entry of the LFO. So if you pull this up, it's about like almost 1 second here. It's going to, you're going to hear the sound by itself for a second, and then you're going to hear the LFO turn on. So you can use that to delay the entry of the LFO. Another way to do this is to pull up the attack time of the LFO. It's essentially applying the attack stage of an envelope onto the LFO, causing the LFO to fade in rather than immediately turn on. I actually like that better because it delays it a little bit and makes it just a little bit softer. Another thing you can do, and I'll demonstrate this on another one. I'll turn on just this sawtooth here. I'll modulate volume with a new LFO, and I'll make this like square wave or something, and I'll make it a quarter note. If you have this in trigger mode, and you play two notes slightly off time with each other, or more notes off time with each other, each note has its own LFO. It's essentially a polyphonic LFO. If you turn trigger mode off, all notes that you play share the same LFO. Believe it or not, I was actually hitting those keys all at separate times, but they all kept the same LFO motion. So I find that turning trigger mode off actually works better for musical things than turning it on. So on my LFO, on my drive edge source, I'm actually going to turn that off. All right, so let's hear what we've got so far with just these three together. Cool, that's kind of cool. It's sort of like a pulsing motion. Let's make even more out of the rhythm of this. I'm going to turn off A, B, and C, go just to D. This time we're going to, instead of using the envelope or an LFO, we're going to use the sequencer. The sequencer is really cool. It's essentially a step sequencer that's built right into Alchemy that allows you to modulate any knob up here just like we could at the LFO or the envelope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modulate the volume of this saw. Let's turn that on. Let's go to sequencer number 1. Now, initially what this is each one of these steps is a 16th note. So when I play, you'll get that. And what you can do is you can pull down the volume of each step or certain steps to sort of bring the signal in and bring the signal out at certain points and create sort of like a rhythmic feel to it. Kind of similar to the LFO. If you have trigger mode on, basically every time you press a new key, it re-triggers the entire sequencer. So it won't just cycle through. If you turn trigger mode off, the sequencer is constantly moving to the session tempo. So let's create a little bit of like a almost like a bass underneath like the synth pad. I'm gonna pull the coarse tuning down a full octave, and I'm just gonna create like there are some presets in here. If you click on the file menu, you can go preset and you can say add, you know, all even steps or all odd steps. Another thing I'm going to do with my sawtooth here is I'm going to pull down this low pass filter. Let's throw the mech filter in here. There we go. And let's see if actually we can find a different sound here. Let's use that. I want something pretty simple. I don't want it to be like really like a complex rhythm. I don't want it to be too busy. And oh, whoops! I had my rate off. By the way, the rate is the rate shows basically what the value of each step is. I must have accidentally clicked on it. It was supposed to be 1/16. Yeah, I'm gonna turn trigger off. I like the way that sounds. Another thing you can do here is you can actually value snap the values to sort of quantize. Quantize is probably a bad word, but quantize the position up or down. So if I just want to split this into quarters, you can choose quarter. And when you click on this, you'll only get 4 values, 4, 3, 2, or 1. So you can sort of standardize some of the positions instead of sort of playing a guessing game. And you can also make the sequence longer if you like, or shorter. So I like that. Let's see what that sounds like with everything in there. Cool, that's really cool. One thing I want to do is sort of give this sort of some percussive motion. I'm going to go back to the drive edge source. I'm going to turn on a noise generator here. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to modulate the noise. I'm just going to turn off the actual oscillator just for a second and just leave the noise on. And I'm going to modulate this white noise with another sequencer. Because the one we're hearing right now is the LFO number 3. So let's actually turn off the master source volume modulation, and let's move this modulation over to just the oscillator. So it just affects the oscillator signal, not the oscillator and the noise signal. So you can actually do that. You can control them individually. So let's turn LFO 3 on drive edge. So the white noise is not affected by that pulsing motion. And let's do something special for the white noise. Let's move this one over to a sequencer, new sequencer. I'm going to create a really short one with just basically 4 notes, turn trigger off. It's just going to be a 1 and a 1 and a 1 and a 1 sort of motion. So we're going to do something like this. By the way, if you have like some sequences that you use a lot, you can actually do this with the LFOs and the envelopes as well, but you have a setting that you like to use a lot, you can click on File, go to Save, and you can save it. I'll just call this 1 and a. And then under File, Preset, you'll see 1 and a in there. So let's see what noise I want to use here. I kind of like the straw. It almost sounds like a shaker. Yeah, let's use that, and let's see what the two sound like together. Yeah, so here's the problem. Sometimes the rhythms don't always interlock properly. Let's try a different pattern for the oscillator. There we go, that works. That's kind of cool. So let's do that. All right, so let's see what all three of these or all four of these sound like together. Yeah, that's really cool. I'm gonna pull the oscillator though on the drive edge down just a touch. It's a little too loud for my taste. One last thing I'll modulate actually on this oscillator while we have it up is I'm going to modulate the pan on this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the pan knob, turn the target on, go to LFO, and create a new LFO. I think LFO 4 is not being used. Yeah, I think that was the one I used just for demonstrations. Let's go to LFO 4. And we're going to use just the sine wave, and we'll sync it to like a half note. So now we got this panning effect on top of all this other modulation that we've thrown in there. Another thing you can do with the sequencer is you can play with the attack, sustain, and release time of each point in the sequence, and you can sort of smooth out the motion if you want, or change the envelope of each one of these notes, which is kind of cool. So if I want my notes to be a little bit smoother, I can pull the attack time up. So now they're not so harsh on the front end. You can pull the sustain down to hear less length on the note, I suppose. The signal drops down to a lower sustain point. And you can pull the release up to make them ring a little bit. Another way to sort of smooth out your motion of really any of your modulation effects is there is a smooth knob that if you pull up, it'll smooth out the motion of the effect a bit. Sometimes, though, it smooths it out too much, so I'm not going to use that. I'm going to just pull the attack up a bit, the sustain down a bit, and the release up a bit. All right, so now that I have a sound that I like, I'm going to move the MIDI clip from the piano down here. Let's delete that piano, and I'll pull the volume down on my Alchemy synth just a touch. And let's just see what this sounds like all together. Let's try up an octave. I'm just gonna hit Command A and then hit Shift Option up. I think it'll sound a little bit better that way. Cool. I just wanted to make a few adjustments there. I made the envelope a little bit harder so it didn't fade in so much. I got rid of the hold time. I pulled down the cutoff frequency on two of my oscillators and actually turned on and pulled down the cutoff on the master filter here as well. All right, so the only thing left I think this needs now is some effects. I'd like to add some reverb and delay and maybe a bit of compression to glue everything together. The main way you add effects in Alchemy is you use one of these two main effects sends. One comes right after filter 1, one comes right after filter 2. So if you're actually using filter 2, which I'm not right now, you can have filter 2 send more or less signal over to the effects unit than say filter 1 does. I'm just going to pull the effects up to about halfway. I'm not going to worry about filter 2 because I'm not using it at all. So this is just the main effects bus. There's actually 4 individual effects buses as well. We'll talk about those in just a bit. So we're going to choose effects main, go down to effects, go to main, and let's add some reverb. Now there's 3 different reverbs. There's acoustic reverb, classic reverb, and then there's actually convolution reverb, which actually uses impulse responses from Space Designer to create some really cool reverb. So I'm actually going to use this. I'm going to use let's try the Ancient Church. Let's see what that sounds like. And let me turn on my other sources here. I have some of them turned off. So if you want more of that reverb, you just pull up the bus here. And if you want to hear less, you pull it down. So I think about halfway up was just fine. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the drive edge down just a bit. I'm going to pull this filter down a touch too. There we go. All right. Another thing I want to do on my main effects bus is I want a little bit of compression to glue everything together. I'm going to pull the convolution reverb down, create a new effect in here, and they stack on top of each other. Let's try the fat compressor. Yeah, it's pretty simple. There we go. That works for me. Now, one thing I didn't explain in the last video is that you can use this knob on each of the sources to control the blend of each source to filter 1 or filter 2. If I turn on filter 2, let me mute these other sources just for a second here. I'm going to turn on filter 2. You can set this halfway, and you'll see that when you play, the signal is being split equally between filter 1 and filter 2. If I pull this down, it's going to go more toward filter 1. And if I pull this to the right, it's going to go more toward filter 2. That's only when you have it on the F1, F2 setting. It's just telling you what you're splitting between. So if I wanted to, I could put this halfway, have half of the signal go to maybe a different effects bus. Maybe I want this to go to effects A. And on effects A, maybe I want there to be, and again, you just click on A down here, I don't know, a flanger effect. Let's go to, or phaser effect. Let's do that. And if I pull this up on filter 2, the signal is going to filter 2 first and then going to the phaser. But if I pull it to the left, it's just going to filter 1 and then to the main bus with the reverb on it. So you could set this somewhere in between, so you get sort of a blend between the phaser effect and the main reverb. Let's do the same thing with the other sawtooth here. Let's set it about halfway. Let's make this a real slow phase too. And maybe we want less going to filter 2, so we'll pull this down this way a bit, so we're going more toward filter 1 and less of the phasing effect. Another way to do this is to tell a source to go to a specific filter and then go to a specific effects send. So if I want to add, say, like a delay effect to my drive edge here, let's just solo that out. What I can do is I can send it to a specific filter and then send it to a specific effects send. So I'm already using the main, I'm already using A. Let's send the drive edge to filter 1 and then send it to effects B. And then I'm going to go to B, I'm going to add delay. Pull this up. So none of the other sources are going to have that delay on it. Just the drive edge. Let's pull that down just a touch, though. I'm going to do the same thing with the metallic one. I'm going to send this over to filter 1 effects B. Get a little bit of that delay on there. I'm going to make the left channel a little slower. Pull the feedback down a bit. And also, I'm going to band pass the delay. So it's a real sort of empty sounding, more empty sounding delay. Let's try the drive edge as well. Yeah. Let's try all of them together now. Cool. So yeah, the effects sends in Alchemy are a little confusing. I think this might be my one complaint about this synth, is that there isn't just a more straightforward way of using effects sends. I wish there was a way to send source A to one of these effects buses without having to go through a filter, so you could have like a pre-filter effects bus, which I don't believe it has. So that would maybe be my one complaint, but it's a very tiny complaint. All right, so let me just play the track. Let's see what this sounds like with our loop back in there as well. Cool. I just added a 3-band EQ in there too, just boosted the high end a bit, scooped out the mids, and boosted the low end a bit. So I like this setting. I'm going to hit save as. I'm just going to call it, where does it save it by default? Does it go into library? I think it just goes into Alchemy. I'll just call this pulsing, I don't know, dance synth or something like that, a dance pad. There we go. And now I can pull up that setting whenever I want. All right, so in the next episode, we'll keep working with more modulation sources. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of them today. There's just a lot to cover. And I think, what I thought originally was going to be a 3 or 4 part series is going to be more like a 6 or 7 part series, just because there's so much stuff in Alchemy to play with. And I want to be detailed about it. I don't want to just give you sort of the half-ass, hacked together tutorial. I want to give you a tutorial that has every bit of information I could possibly give you. So yeah, in the next episode, we'll keep working with more modulation sources. We'll eventually get to the arpeggiator as well, and we'll also get to, I'll show you how you can assign some of these controls out here to modulation effects that you have up here, so we can sort of tie in what we learned in the first video with what we've been talking about in video number 2 and 3. All right, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.